NEC PCFX. In December 1994, NEC launched the PCFX as a successor to its moderately successful PC Engine. This was supposed to keep NEC in the console race against Sony's new PlayStation and Sega's Saturn, but instead of embracing 3D graphics, the industry's obvious next step, NEC doubled down on 2D anime-style visuals and full motion video. It could produce beautiful, crisp 2D art, but when rivals were showing off 3D worlds like Tekken and Virtua Fighter, the PCFX already looked outdated. The system was also awkwardly designed. Its vertical tower shape made it look like a PC, but without the power or versatility. Most of its library consisted of niche Japanese visual novels, dating sims, and strategy games, genres that had little appeal outside of hardcore fans. There were no blockbuster action or platforming titles to pull in mainstream gamers. Worse, NEC kept the PCFX Japan exclusive, completely shutting out the Western market. With poor marketing, a high price tag, and no killer apps, it sold only about 100,000 units before quietly being discontinued in 1998. The PCFX is now remembered as a console that bet on the wrong future, choosing style over innovation and paying the price. KFC console. In late 2020, KFC shocked the gaming world by announcing the KFC console, a real, working gaming PC built in partnership with Cooler Master. At first, people thought it was an April Fool's joke, but it was genuine hardware. A high-end Intel-powered system with an NVIDIA GPU, 4K and VR support, and one very strange feature, a built-in chicken chamber, to keep your fried chicken warm while you played. The KFC console instantly went viral, but that attention didn't translate into a proper launch. KFC treated it more as a marketing stunt than an actual product, revealing specs but never announcing a firm price or release date. Limited units may have been built, but it never saw a real retail rollout. Instead, it popped up in press releases and interviews, then quietly vanished from the spotlight. Even if it had launched widely, its odd gimmick overshadowed its capabilities. Gamers didn't know whether to take it seriously or treat it as a joke, and the lack of software or distribution meant it had no market presence. Today, the KFC console is remembered more as an internet meme than a failed product, a bizarre footnote in gaming history that never truly left the fryer. Atari VCS 2021. When Atari announced the VCS in 2017, it was pitched as both a modern gaming console and a retro platform, a sleek revival of the company's legendary 2600 heritage. But from the start, the project was plagued by delays, shifting goals, and a crowdfunding campaign that raised eyebrows. Originally scheduled for 2019, it didn't actually ship until mid-2021, long after the hype has cooled. The price, starting at $299 for the base model, put it in direct competition with the Nintendo Switch, yet its specs were closer to a budget PC. It ran a custom Linux-based OS, but most games were just indie titles available elsewhere. Atari leaned heavily on its retro library, but even that was accessible on cheaper devices. Backers complained about poor communication during development, and when reviews finally arrived, they were lukewarm at best. Critics called it a solution in search of a problem, with no must-have exclusives and a confused identity. Was it a console, a streaming box, or a mini PC? Within a year, the VCS had faded from the market conversation, surviving mostly as a novelty for collectors rather than a serious competitor in the console space. Casio Loopy. In 1995, Casio, better known for calculators, watches, and keyboards, decided to enter the game console market with a truly unusual system, the Casio Loopy. Marketed exclusively in Japan, it was aimed entirely at young girls, a demographic most console makers at the time ignored. Its big gimmick? A built-in thermal sticker printer that let players print out images from games as collectible stickers. While the idea was creative, it came at a steep price, about 25,000 yen, which was roughly $250 USD at the time, and the games themselves were extremely limited. Only 10 titles were ever released, most of them simple dress-up or visual novel-style experiences. The printer feature, while fun, used expensive paper refills and wasn't integrated deeply enough into gameplay to feel essential. The Loopy's timing couldn't have been worse. By 1995, the PlayStation and Sega Saturn were showing off advanced 3D graphics, while Nintendo's next console was on the horizon. Against that competition, the Loopy's modest 2D visuals and tiny library couldn't compete. Casio discontinued the system within a couple of years. Today, it's remembered as a quirky, well-intentioned experiment that never had a chance in the mainstream market. If you've made it this far in the video, hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments what your favorite video game of all time is. Here's the next console. Tandy VIS. In 1992, Tandy, known for its Radio Shack electronics, entered the multimedia console market with the Video Information System, or VIS. Built on Microsoft's early modular Windows platform, it was designed as a family-friendly device for interactive CD-ROMs, educational software, and light gaming. The idea was to blend home computing with console convenience, but execution fell flat from the start. The VIS was underpowered, running on a sluggish Intel processor at a time when PCs were already far ahead. Its software library was tiny and uninspired, mostly consisting of edutainment titles and basic point-and-click games. There were no big-name licenses or compelling exclusives to draw attention. The controller was a clunky gamepad with a trackball. It felt awkward and unresponsive. Even its CD-ROM drive was prone to slow load times and to skipping. Worse, the system cost $699 at launch, putting it far above the price of a Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, yet it couldn't compete with either in terms of fun or graphics. Retailers struggled to sell it, and Tandy quietly discontinued the VIS within 2 years. It's now mostly remembered as one of the many early 90s multimedia boxes that failed to find an audience. PlayJam Game Stick. In 2013, during the height of the Android microconsole craze, UK-based PlayJam launched the Game Stick, a tiny HDMI plug-and-play device about the size of a flash drive, paired with a small Bluetooth controller. Funded through Kickstarter, it promised an affordable $79 price tag, portability, and access to hundreds of Android games on your TV. Backers were excited, but problems started immediately. The launch was delayed multiple times, and when units finally shipped, reviews were awful. The hardware was underpowered, struggling to run even modest Android games smoothly. The controller felt cheap, with stiff buttons and laggy input. Its custom interface was bad, and most of the available games were titles already free or cheap on smartphones. Without exclusive content or meaningful partnerships, the Game Stick had no real selling point over simply connecting your phone to a TV. By late 2014, major retailers had dropped the device, and PlayJam shifted focus away from hardware entirely. The Game Stick became yet another casualty of the short-lived microconsole boom, a Kickstarter success story that collapsed the moment it hit the real world. R-Zone. In 1995, Tiger Electronics, fresh off success with its cheap LCD handhelds, decided to compete with Nintendo and Sega in the portable market. The result was the R-Zone, a head-mounted gaming device that projected a red monochrome image onto a small reflective screen positioned in front of one eye. It looked like sci-fi technology, but it was really just a headache machine. The R-Zone's games came on transparent cartridges with built-in LCD screens, similar to Tiger's handhelds, meaning the graphics were static, low resolution, and painfully limited. The projection gimmick simply reflected that tiny LCD image into your eye, creating dim, hard-to-see visuals that were impossible to play comfortably for long. The controls were attached via a wired gamepad and were unresponsive. Also, the awkward headband design made the device uncomfortable almost instantly. Even with licenses like Batman Forever and Virtua Fighter, gameplay was shallow and repetitive. Retailers heavily discounted the R-Zone within a year, and Tiger released cheaper tabletop and handheld variants, but none caught on. By the late 90s, the R-Zone was quietly discontinued, living on only as a punchline in worst console ever lists. Zibo. In 2009, a Brazilian startup launched the Zibo, a 3G connected console designed to combat piracy in emerging markets. Instead of physical discs or cartridges, all games were downloaded directly over the network, an innovative concept for the time. The system ran a custom Qualcomm chipset and targeted countries like Brazil and Mexico, where piracy often crippled console sales. While the idea had promise, the execution fell apart quickly. The Zibo was underpowered, producing graphics on par with a late PlayStation 1 game. Its library consisted mostly of mobile-style ports and heavily downgraded versions of older titles like Resident Evil 4 and Need for Speed Carbon. The always-online requirement was another issue. 3G connections were slow and unreliable, making downloads painfully long. And while it was meant to be affordable, it launched at a price that wasn't competitive with used PS2s, which had vastly better games. By 2011, the Zibo's sales had flatlined, and the company shut down operations entirely. Though short-lived, it remains a fascinating example of how noble intentions can't save a console with weak specs, poor support, and no killer apps. Panasonic Q. In 2001, Nintendo partnered with Panasonic to create the Panasonic Q, a hybrid device that was both a GameCube and a full-featured DVD player. At the time, one of the GameCube's biggest weaknesses was its inability to play DVDs, something the PlayStation 2 could do right out of the box. The Q seemed like the perfect solution, especially for Japanese consumers who valued multifunction electronics. The system featured a sleek, chrome finish, a front-loading DVD tray, and upgraded audio outputs. It looked more like high-end home theater equipment than a traditional game console. But there was a problem. The Q launched only in Japan, cost nearly double a standard GameCube, and offered no gameplay advantages beyond DVD playback. By 2001, standalone DVD players were becoming cheap and common, making the Cube's main selling point far less attractive. Software sales for the GameCube in Japan were already lagging, and the Cube didn't give the platform any significant boost. Panasonic discontinued it in 2003 after poor sales. Today, the Cube is remembered as a beautiful but unnecessary luxury item, more of a collector's curiosity than a meaningful part of Nintendo's console history. VTech Creativision. In 1981, educational electronics company VTech entered the home console race with the Creativision, a hybrid system that combined a game console with a basic home computer. It featured a full keyboard, 2 joystick controllers, and a cartridge slot, promising both entertainment and productivity. On paper, it was a forward-thinking idea, but in practice, it fell short in nearly every area. The Creativision's hardware was underpowered compared to rivals like the Atari 2600 and ColecoVision. Games often ran sluggishly, with clunky graphics and limited sound. The controller design didn't help either. The joysticks were awkwardly mounted on the keyboard itself, making them uncomfortable to use. Its software library was tiny, with many titles being blatant clones of existing arcade hits. While VTech marketed it as both a learning tool and a gaming system, it didn't excel at either role. Educational software was shallow, and the games lacked the polish needed to compete. Distribution was also spotty, with the console releasing in select regions like Australia, New Zealand, and parts of Europe, but never finding a stable global market. By the mid-1980s, the Creativision was quietly discontinued, remembered as an ambitious but ultimately forgettable hybrid. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos daily.